I think there's a lot of concern across the country about SB 1070 in particular and the need to stop that, and everybody is very supportive of the legal battle against it. But I also think that there is broad concern about what SB 1070 represents and has unleashed across the country. I think we're seeing the repercussions of it in many other states. Just in Utah yesterday, where there seems to have been a breach in confidentiality to publish the names, date of birth, and very private information of about 1,300 people, and asking the government to deport them from an anonymous group. Latinos are seeing the environment on immigration as a clear, sustained, and systematic assault against our community. Immigration has been left behind, and SB 1070, frankly, has very little to do with public policy. This is a vehicle for what has been an anti-Latino environment that it now is being legislated.
Well, when you gather chapters of an organization like yours from all around the country, I mean, most people are not from Arizona, but many of them are from states where they're actually considering a similar law.
That's right. And that's why we think it's so important that, frankly, the Department of Justice had no alternative but to intervene. When somebody is challenging directly the authority of the federal government, it is the job of the Department of Justice to intervene. We hope that that sends a signal to other states. But there we go again to the question of whether the authors of SB 1070 and the law itself are concerned with the immigration problem and with providing public solutions to it. You already have other states saying, we don't care what happens, we're going to introduce it anyway. It is very clear that what's behind this and similar laws by the same folks who brought you 1070 is politics and steering up and pushing a lot of buttons of a legitimately frustrated public, frustration we share, but providing a false solution to a very real problem.
Mary, if SB 1070 takes effect, which it will do in just a number of days from now, and the sky doesn't fall, if there's not wholesale shaking people down on the street, if the local police in Arizona mind their P's and Q's and understand that there's a very closely watching public, is that actually worse for the struggle against this law?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to remember about SB 1070 is that in many ways it's institutionalizing things that have been happening in Arizona and elsewhere for a long time, at least in terms of the arguments with respect to racial profiling and how people like Sheriff Joe Arpaio operate. There's any number of instances in the state of Arizona right now where people are being targeted because of the color of their skin. So that's one set of issues that aren't going to go away regardless of whether or not there's an injunction against SB 1070. The bigger question, I think, is that if it goes into effect, what are the repercussions going to be across the state and then across the country with respect to the costs of enforcing it? Already we know that many police departments are considering perhaps not enforcing the law, or wondering whether or not if they have to enforce the law and they don't do it to the satisfaction of individual members of the community, whether or not they're going to be sued, because under SB 1070 they can be sued if they're not fully enforcing the immigration laws. So there's an underlying climate of fear and concern about SB 1070, I think, regardless of whether or not it goes into effect in the next couple of weeks.
Gebe Martinez, while it might not be very popular at this table among this panel, this law is not unpopular among rank and file Americans. Almost every poll I've seen, from pollsters who identify with the Republican Party, pollsters who identify with the Democratic Party, nonpartisan pollsters, show a majority of Americans in favor, and many willing to say they'd like to have a law like that in their own state. What do you make of that?
That they don't have any other choice. People who say that they favor the Arizona law are, I think, expressing the frustration that Clarissa spoke about. People want something done, and in the absence of an alternative, they're saying, we'll do that. If you ask in the same poll, do you support comprehensive immigration reform? They're almost even. There are some polls that have shown that the support for the Arizona law is even with support for comprehensive immigration reform. And then when you ask people separately about comprehensive immigration reform, they support that. They would rather have something that is practical, that is fair, that deals with all of the issues. Arizona only deals with border security and with going after people who look like they don't belong in the state. And one of the things that is sort of insidious about the Arizona law is that at the very top of it, it says that it is the stated policy of the state now through this law to have attrition through enforcement. In other words, if we make things bad enough for them, they'll leave. People in general, and I think the Americans really are not mean-spirited. They understand that our economy has been sustained by the hard labor of a lot of immigrants. And employers understand that they have benefited from their labor as well. And so what they want is something that's practical, that says, how do we bring everybody into a legal system? And so when we see these polls, they're very misleading. Unfortunately, people who don't study it and get into the weeds of it like we do, just say, oh, support is growing, therefore I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and be for it too. I think without really realizing the ramifications of the law.
But public opinion is really a sampling of 300 million people who don't get into the weeds. That's just the point.
That's a challenge.
You ask them, they're walking to work or they're coming out of lunch, and you ask them, do you think your state should have a law like this, where if you catch people while they're doing something else and it turns out they're not here in status, chuck them out? And they say, oh yeah, sure.
Right. No, that's true, and that is the challenge. And the truth is that the perception is I think the perception is based on a lot of false assumptions as well. I mean, you hear the Arizona politicians talking, and you'd think that there was crime happening all over Arizona because of undocumented immigrants. And most of the crime actually is happening on the Mexican side of the border, involving the drug war lords and those people. So there is very subtle, but what people say, they hear rising crime, they hear rising undocumented immigration. We have to do something. We're frustrated. Okay, let's support this.